On October 12, 2010, in Tacoma, Washington, a brutal crime occurred that would irreversibly alter the lives of the Bradford family. 16-year-old Nika Bradford, a promising gymnast at Tacoma Central High School, was returning from her evening practice at the local gymnastics academy on Maple Street. The abduction took place on Maple Street, between an abandoned car wash facility and a local grocery store. Surveillance footage from the store, though of poor quality, captured the moment when a black Dodge Caravan, manufactured between 2008 and 2010, pulled up alongside Nika. 2 witnesses later reported hearing screams, but by the time they reached the location, the vehicle had already fled the scene. Laura Bradford, Nika's mother, became concerned when her daughter failed to return home and had not answered several phone calls. After multiple unanswered calls to Nika's cell phone, Laura contacted the police. Officer Sarah Martinez was the first to respond to the emergency call and arrived at the Bradford residence shortly after. The Tacoma Police Department immediately initiated a search operation, deploying multiple units across the city's industrial district, where similar vehicles had been reported in previous weeks. A security guard at the local industrial complex, located approximately 4 miles from the abduction site, discovered Nika unconscious behind an abandoned warehouse. David Bradford, Nika's father, was working a late shift at a local auto service center when he received the devastating call from his wife. A respected mechanic with 15 years of experience at the service center, David rushed to the nearest medical center, where paramedics had transported his daughter. Medical records documented severe injuries, including multiple contusions, internal bleeding, and signs of sexual assault. The attending emergency physician classified Nika's condition as critical but stable. The initial medical examination revealed defensive wounds on her hands and arms, indicating she had fought against her attacker. Detective James Wilson, assigned as the lead investigator, established a timeline of events. The entire ordeal had lasted approximately 4 hours, during which the perpetrator had taken Nika to an unknown secondary location before abandoning her at the industrial complex. Evidence collected from the scene included tire tracks, partial fingerprints, and traces of automotive grease, suggesting the perpetrator might have connections to the automotive industry. The Tacoma Police Department issued a citywide alert for the black Dodge Caravan, but the vehicle's license plate had been deliberately obscured during the crime, significantly hampering initial investigation efforts. The investigation team, led by Detective Wilson, began an extensive canvass of local auto repair shops and dealerships, working on the theory that the perpetrator's knowledge of vehicles might lead to a breakthrough in the case. They also started compiling a database of similar incidents in neighboring counties, searching for patterns that might help identify the attacker. During her medical examination, Nika provided crucial information about her attacker, describing a distinctive tattoo she had glimpsed during the assault, a snake coiled around a dagger with the initials VK. This detail became a central focus of the investigation. Detective James Wilson assembled a task force of 6 investigators to work on the case. They began by analyzing surveillance footage from various locations along Maple Street and surrounding areas. However, the footage proved to be too grainy to identify the vehicle's license plate or provide a clear image of the driver. Forensic technicians attempted to enhance the video quality, but were unsuccessful in obtaining usable evidence. David Bradford, refusing to remain passive in the search for his daughter's attacker, began his own parallel investigation. Using his extensive network of contacts in the automotive industry, built over 15 years, he systematically documented every black Dodge Caravan he encountered. He created detailed records of vehicle owners, checking their backgrounds and noting any suspicious behavior. His efforts, while thorough, yielded no concrete leads. The police conducted extensive interviews with the 2 witnesses who had heard Nika's screams during the abduction. Both described hearing tires screeching and a door sliding shut, but neither had seen the driver clearly. One witness noted that the van had appeared to have been recently washed and detailed, suggesting the perpetrator was methodical in concealing evidence. DNA evidence collected from Nika's clothing and the crime scene failed to match any profiles in law enforcement databases. Tire track analysis confirmed the vehicle model, but offered no additional identifying characteristics. The automotive grease found at the scene was a common type used in most repair shops, providing no specific leads. Despite conducting over 200 interviews and following up on numerous tips from the public, investigators struggled to develop solid leads. The task force established that the perpetrator likely had automotive expertise based on their vehicle choice and ability to avoid detection. But this connection proved too broad to narrow down potential suspects effectively. By January 2011, 3 months after the assault, the active investigation began to slow. Resources were gradually reallocated to other cases as leads dried up. Detective Wilson maintained the case file as active, but was forced to acknowledge that without new evidence or witnesses coming forward, the chances of identifying the attacker were diminishing. The reduction in police activity did not deter David Bradford. He continued his personal investigation, often working late into the night after his regular shifts at the auto shop. He expanded his search to include body shops and custom car facilities, theorizing that someone who had modified their vehicle might have knowledge about the attack. His dedication to finding the perpetrator began to take a toll on his personal life and work performance. By the end of the 3rd month, the case had officially transitioned to cold case status, though Detective Wilson continued to check new leads as they emerged. The investigation files remained accessible, waiting for the one piece of evidence that might break the case open. Following the brutal assault in October 2010, Nika Bradford struggled with severe psychological trauma. Despite her physical wounds healing, the emotional scars proved far more devastating. The once vibrant gymnast withdrew from school activities and stopped attending her beloved gymnastics classes at the local academy. Medical records from the psychiatric department documented Nika's battle with severe post-traumatic stress disorder and clinical depression. She began treatment with Dr. Rachel Thompson, a trauma specialist, attending 3 sessions per week. The treatment plan included both cognitive behavioral therapy and prescribed antidepressants, but Nika showed minimal response to either intervention. During therapy sessions, Nika reported persistent nightmares and flashbacks of the attack. She developed an intense fear of vehicles, particularly dark-colored vans, which triggered severe panic attacks. Her sleep patterns became severely disrupted, and she rarely left the house except for medical appointments. School records show she switched to home-based learning as she found it impossible to concentrate in classroom settings. The Bradford family tried various approaches to help their daughter. Laura Bradford took a leave of absence from her teaching position to provide full-time support. They relocated Nika's bedroom to the ground floor when she developed anxiety about stairs, reminiscent of the warehouse where she was found. The family also adopted a therapy dog, but even this intervention failed to lift Nika's deepening depression. As winter progressed, Nika's condition deteriorated significantly. She stopped responding to text messages from her former teammates and refused to see her closest friends. Her medication dosage was adjusted several times, but the prescribed antidepressants seemed to have little effect. Dr. Thompson noted increasing concerns about Nika's withdrawal and loss of interest in activities she previously enjoyed. On February 15, 2011, exactly 4 months after the assault, Laura Bradford went to check on her daughter after she failed to come down for breakfast. She discovered Nika unresponsive in her bed. Medical examiners later confirmed that she had ingested a fatal dose of sleeping medication, which she had been secretly stockpiling from her prescriptions. The suicide note found beside her bed revealed the depth of her suffering. Written in steady handwriting, Nika expressed her inability to overcome the trauma of the assault. The note also contained apologies to her parents and a request for them not to blame themselves. The autopsy report confirmed the cause of death as acute pharmaceutical toxicity. Toxicology results showed high levels of prescription sleep medication in her system. The medical examiner noted that the amount ingested indicated a deliberate and planned act rather than an accidental overdose. The news of Nika's death sent shockwaves through the Tacoma community. Her high school held a memorial service where former teammates and teachers spoke about her achievements and the bright future she had ahead of her. The impact on the Bradford family was devastating. Laura and David found themselves unable to remain in their family home, surrounded by memories of their daughter. The couple's marriage, already strained by the aftermath of the assault and David's obsessive search for the attacker, began to show serious signs of stress. Detective Wilson, upon learning of Nika's death, reclassified the case to include the secondary death investigation. The tragic development added another layer to the original assault case, effectively elevating the consequences of the unsolved crime and intensifying the urgency to find the perpetrator, even as the trail grew colder. Unable to cope with the loss of their only child and the strain of their deteriorating marriage, Laura and David Bradford separated in March 2011. Laura relocated to Portland, Oregon, where her parents offered emotional support and a chance to rebuild her life away from the haunting memories of Tacoma. David Bradford's grief manifested in an all-consuming obsession with finding his daughter's attacker. In April 2011, he resigned from his long-term position at the auto service center, liquidated his retirement savings, and began what would become an 11-year journey along the West Coast. His mission was singular: to locate the man with the snake and dagger tattoo bearing the initials VK. From 2011 to 2021, Bradford worked as a mechanic in countless automotive shops between Seattle and San Diego. He developed a systematic approach to his search, typically staying in each location for 3 to 6 months before moving on. His employment records show positions in major cities including Portland, Sacramento, Los Angeles, and numerous smaller towns along the Pacific Coast. In each new location, Bradford maintained detailed notebooks documenting every individual he encountered with tattoos, particularly focusing on those involving snakes or daggers. He photographed suspicious markings when possible, and collected information about local tattoo artists specializing in similar designs. His apartment walls became covered with maps marking the locations of auto shops and tattoo parlors across 3 states. During this period, Bradford's behavior became increasingly methodical. He created elaborate spreadsheets tracking vehicle maintenance records, paying particular attention to black Dodge Caravans from the late 2000s. His coworkers often noted his intense interest in customers with automotive knowledge, especially those who appeared to match the general description of the attacker. Former colleagues reported that Bradford would work excessive hours, often volunteering for additional shifts that allowed him to inspect more vehicles. He developed a reputation for being thorough and detail-oriented in his work, but also distant and singularly focused. Many described him as a man possessed by a mission that consumed every aspect of his life. Despite maintaining a low profile, Bradford stayed in regular contact with Detective Wilson in Tacoma, periodically sending possible leads and information about suspicious individuals. While most of these leads proved fruitless, his dedication never wavered. He also developed a network of contacts in various auto shops, creating an informal intelligence network that helped him track potential suspects across state lines. Bradford's personal life during these years was virtually non-existent. Bank records show his earnings were spent primarily on basic living expenses and investigation-related costs. He lived in modest accommodations, often in weekly-rate motels or small apartments near his temporary workplaces. His only regular social interactions were with co-workers and individuals who might help advance his search. Medical records from this period indicate Bradford suffered from chronic insomnia and anxiety, though he consistently refused psychological treatment. He maintained a rigorous physical routine, believing he needed to stay fit to confront his daughter's attacker if the opportunity arose. His few personal possessions included a worn photograph of Nika and her suicide note, which he carried as constant reminders of his purpose. By early 2021, Bradford had investigated hundreds of potential suspects and accumulated thousands of pages of notes and photographs. His search had become more refined over the years, focusing on individuals with specific connections to both the automotive industry and the Pacific Northwest region around the time of Nika's attack. In January 2022, David Bradford's 11-year search led him to an automotive exhibition in Tacoma. Among the attendees was Victor Crane, owner of a local auto repair shop. What caught Bradford's attention was a distinctive tattoo on Crane's forearm, a snake coiled around a dagger with the initials VK, matching the description his daughter had provided over a decade ago. Bradford conducted detailed surveillance of his suspect, securing employment at a neighboring auto repair shop. From this vantage point, he meticulously documented Crane's daily routines over the course of a month. Investigation records show that Bradford mapped out Crane's regular schedule, noting that he typically worked late hours alone at his shop on Tuesday evenings. Security camera footage revealed that Bradford spent these weeks studying the layout of Crane's facility, observing entry points and security measures. He took particular interest in the shop's closing procedures and alarm systems. Phone records indicate he made several calls to local supply stores, purchasing items that would later be identified as implements of torture. On February 15, 2022, exactly 11 years after his daughter's suicide, Bradford executed his meticulously planned confrontation. He entered Crane's auto shop shortly after closing time, armed with tools and a digital voice recorder. Police reports indicate that Bradford disabled the security system using knowledge gained from his surveillance. The following events were reconstructed from crime scene evidence and Bradford's recorded confession. Over several hours, Bradford subjected Crane to systematic torture, using various tools from the auto shop. During this ordeal, Bradford obtained a recorded confession from Crane, acknowledging his role in Nika Bradford's assault 11 years earlier. The medical examiner's report detailed extensive injuries inflicted on Crane, indicating a prolonged period of suffering before death. The torture methods showed technical knowledge of human anatomy, suggesting Bradford had studied how to inflict maximum pain while keeping his victim conscious and able to speak. After killing Crane, Bradford attempted to end his own life using the same type of sleeping medication that had claimed his daughter's life 11 years earlier. However, the dose proved insufficient. Emergency responders, alerted by an anonymous call from a neighboring business, found Bradford unconscious but alive at the scene. Crime scene investigators recovered the digital voice recorder containing Crane's confession and Bradford's own detailed account of his motivations. The recording revealed that Bradford had planned this confrontation for years, saving the final act for the anniversary of his daughter's death. The audio evidence would later play a crucial role in the subsequent legal proceedings. Forensic analysis of the crime scene revealed Bradford's methodical approach. He had carefully selected tools that would not be immediately missed from his workplace, wearing gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. The only DNA evidence found belonged to him and Crane, suggesting no other participants were involved. The initial police response was led by Detective Wilson, who had maintained the original case file from 2010. His report noted the ironic circumstance that Bradford's vigilante action had finally confirmed the identity of Nika's attacker, though through means that would ensure his own imprisonment. Bradford was transported to the hospital under police custody, where doctors treated him for the failed suicide attempt. Medical records indicate he remained largely unresponsive to questioning during his initial recovery, speaking only to confirm that he had achieved what he set out to do 11 years earlier. The trial of David Bradford began on April 5, 2022, in the Washington State Supreme Court. State prosecutors, led by District Attorney Margaret Stevens, sought a life sentence without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder. The prosecution's case emphasized the premeditated nature of the crime, presenting evidence of Bradford's extensive surveillance and careful planning leading up to Crane's murder. During the opening arguments, prosecutors detailed Bradford's methodical preparation, including his strategic employment near Crane's business, the acquisition of torture implements, and the calculated timing of the murder to coincide with the anniversary of his daughter's death. They argued that such deliberate planning demonstrated a clear intent that warranted the maximum sentence. The defense team, headed by attorney Thomas Mitchell, constructed their argument around three key elements. The first and most compelling piece of evidence was the audio recording recovered from the crime scene, containing Victor Crane's confession to the 2010 assault on Nika Bradford. Forensic audio analysts confirmed the authenticity of the recording, providing the first concrete evidence linking Crane to the original crime. The second pillar of the defense strategy centered on Bradford's psychological evaluation. Dr. Sarah Patterson, a forensic psychiatrist, testified about Bradford's severe trauma-induced psychological deterioration over the 11 years following his daughter's suicide. Her assessment detailed how the unresolved trauma and grief had manifested in an obsessive pursuit of justice, significantly impacting his mental state and decision-making capacity. The third element focused on Bradford's previously unblemished record. The defense presented testimony from numerous former employers and colleagues from auto shops across the West Coast, all attesting to his professional conduct and dedicated work ethic during his 11-year search. These character witnesses painted a picture of a man driven by grief rather than inherent criminal tendencies. The jury deliberations lasted 3 days, during which they requested multiple reviews of both the audio confession and Dr. Patterson's psychological evaluation. On May 12, 2022, they returned with their verdict. The court sentenced David Bradford to 30 years in prison with mandatory psychiatric treatment and the possibility of parole after 20 years. In his final statement to the court, Bradford spoke briefly, expressing no remorse for Crane's death. His only stated regret was his survival of the suicide attempt, saying he had hoped to follow his daughter's path. This statement significantly influenced the judge's decision to include mandatory psychiatric treatment in the sentence. Following his sentencing, Bradford underwent comprehensive psychological evaluation at the state prison facility. Prison psychiatrists diagnosed him with severe personality disorder, complicated by post-traumatic stress disorder and chronic depression. The medical team noted his high suicide risk, implementing protocols for continuous monitoring. Currently, Bradford serves his sentence in a maximum security facility under constant medical supervision. Prison records indicate his continued refusal to participate in group therapy sessions, though he maintains compliance with his prescribed psychiatric medication regimen. The facility's mental health staff report his persistent preoccupation with his daughter's case, suggesting that even after achieving his mission of revenge, Bradford remains haunted by the events that destroyed his family. The case has since been cited in numerous legal discussions regarding vigilante justice and has prompted debates about the adequacy of support systems for families of violent crime victims.